Welcome to Bootstrappers, a program designed to bring you up-to-the-minute ideas and concepts to understand what it takes to succeed in business and life. Each week, we'll bring you guests and ideas you can't find anywhere else. Bootstrappers is a production of Anequim, LLC. Now strap on those business boots and join Bootstrappers with Jeremy and Gwen Aspen.
Welcome to this episode of Bootstrappers, everybody. I'm your host, Gwen Aspen, president of Anequim, and I'm here with my spouse,
Jeremy Aspen.
Jeremy Aspen,
Yay.
president of Wistar Group, property management here in Omaha. And if you're new to Bootstrappers, we talk to successful community leaders, business people, today a congressional candidate, about their experiences and trials and tribulations of leading companies, leading organizations, and doing amazing things. So even if you are not a business person or you're not in our primary field, which is property management, a lot of these tips and tricks are tips and tricks. Tricks, are we saying tricks? Are concepts and things that you could use in any aspect of your life. So with that, we want to introduce Cara Eastman, who is a congressional candidate here in Nebraska in the 2nd District.
Yeah, if you're from Nebraska and you're listening to this on the radio, you know that already.
And she also, for 12 years, ran an organization called Omaha Healthy Kids Alliance, which helped kids with their health in respect to the housing environment. Is that a good way to, how would you describe it,
Yeah,
Cara?
that's a perfect way.
Is that, okay, so were going to talk about not her campaign today, though.
We're not talking campaign. And so, but we should probably lay this down, that she is a Democrat. I don't think you'd mention that. And,
I have not mentioned that.
And it's not going to be germane here, but she's the Democratic nominee for Nebraska CD2.
Yes.
And we're Republicans, which is germane to the topic today.
Yes. So because we're in property management, we talk to property managers across the United States. One of the things that's really come up lately is that small business is not fighting, but it's getting really testy between business, government, and nonprofits, especially with all the things with COVID and everything going on. It's gotten kind of nasty. And so what we wanted to do is have Cara on the show and talk about how she's worked with people in the business community on coming up with bills that are palatable to both sides, both some of the Democrats and Republicans. And we've gotten a lot of bipartisan legislation done here in Nebraska. And so a funny thing about this show is I'm actually going to be interviewing both Jeremy and Cara because we all became friends about a decade ago when Jeremy and I were Republican. What were we? Republican activists, Jeremy?
Well, so yeah, I was doing a radio show at the time, and I had just gotten off of a campaign to oust our then mayor, Subtle. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of about when we met.
Mm-hmm. And Cara was running the Omaha Healthy Kids Alliance, and there was a bill out to create some legislation that if you were going to remediate lead in a house, you had to follow some procedures. And of course, the landlord community was up in arms with it. So I actually want to talk to Jeremy. What is your view of what happened at that point, and how did you and Cara make sure that both the landlord community and the people in public health could get along and
I pretty much
together?
Just told her what to do.
No, gosh.
I was just like, hey, you're wrong, I'm right.
No.
Like, that's how that went, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that went over really well.
Yeah. And actually, that never works.
It never works, which is why we're talking
today. Which is the point of today's show. Because while I was at the time, certainly involved in the Republican Party, I was also ideologically definitely misaligned with you. You've always been a Democrat and proud of it for some weird reason. I'm just kidding.
We get free kale.
Oh, that's the
Free
trick.
kale.
Free kale if you're a Democrat?
Yep.
Oh, my God.
All
that's
you can eat.
Fantastic. So, I mean, going back that long, the details might be a little foggy, but it was hard for, I think, probably you to find any traction in trying to find partners to help get into people's houses that needed remediation or needed some way of protecting, especially children, from lead. And whilst we differed on almost everything ideologically, if you stand back far enough, this is the tact I took back then. If you stand back far enough, you can always identify an opportunity for people to see things. We have the same goal. Mm-hmm. So protect children. That's okay. So we all agree protecting children is worth doing. And if you start there and you start doing problem solving, or I actually would say probably solution searching, you're going to be far more likely to find solutions. And if you start off from the premise that you don't agree with what I say and then we don't get anywhere. So that's how that's how when you approached me with it, you approached me, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. We kind of saw it as an opportunity to do some good, and did. I think you'd know better what the successes were or the failures of that particular program, but we've worked together on, I think, 3 different things. One of them was RRP. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that one ever became legislation or if we just did something operational, but then we also did lead initiatives and then carbon monoxide.
Mm-hmm. But so, Cara, from your point of view, I mean, you had to work with landlords all the time. So how did you help them? How did you break the ice and make it so they didn't see you as the enemy, being from this nonprofit that was going to come in and ask them to spend money to remediate lead in their property?
Well, I think that coming from the nonprofit perspective, those of us who have led nonprofits see the liabilities in government regulation just like the for-profit world does. We see that there's red tape. We see all of the hoops that people have to jump through.
Because you have to jump through them too.
Absolutely. And in trying to convince people that this is the right thing to do, we know that when it impacts their bottom line, that's a challenge. So when you think about something like the RRP rule, which would require contractors to have all these safety gear.
So what is the RRP rule? Just so our listeners know.
So that was an EPA rule called the Renovation, Repair, and Painting that basically required safety procedures to be implemented and used when renovating a property that has lead in it.
Especially for our property management viewers and listeners, that's a problem, especially if you haven't heard of RRP, that's a problem. But what happens is if you go in and do any work on a house or any residence, then it is incumbent upon you, if you're going to disturb, for example, 9 square feet in a house on a wall, you have to take a sampling of the paint and look for lead. And if you find lead, you remediate it, or you have to take precautions to make sure that lead dust and flakes aren't.
And you have to be certified to do that.
You have to be certified. And
so that was kind of where this law, where there was that conflict between the landlord community and government, was that you had to take the class, you had to become certified, which was an added expense, and on top of that, they were going to force people to remediate in a specific way, and the landlord community had never had to do that before. Right. So that's where there was a ton of conflict. And I know some people in the community just came at you hard and mean and in an obstinate way. And so, but then Jeremy thought,
well, I'm curious how much. I don't know. I know some during at least carbon monoxide and the lead, they were total dicks. But during the RRP, I don't know if you ran into that at that point, or if you just got lucky and met me first.
I actually met Paul Vajeski first.
Oh yeah, that's right.
He introduced me to you. Yeah. But yeah, no, there were definitely people, and we understood that. I mean, and if you think about it from the advocacy world and actually how the RRP got passed. I mean, again, it gets back to what you're saying. Like, we all have the same goal, right? We don't want children to be poisoned by lead, the number one environmental hazard to them, a neurotoxin that causes IQ deficits, behavioral problems, criminal behavior later in life. So, like, that was something we all agreed we didn't want. And so was the RRP, like, the best way to get to that? No, but it's a step, right? Because when I think about it in our world, what we're looking for is to get lead out of homes. But then if you think about the number of homes in our country, these are homes built before 1978. You know, if a home was built before 1950, it's much higher likelihood to have lead in it. We're talking a lot of houses. It's very expensive. And so to put the onus solely on the property owner, the landlord, is challenging, right? Because you buy properties, you don't necessarily buy them thinking they're going to poison children.
Right.
It's not anybody's goal. But so the RRP came about as like an effort to at least get people certified. We don't want contractors getting poisoned. We don't want kids getting poisoned.
So what I'm hearing from you guys is that the first thing is realizing that you have a common goal, or finding common ground would be the first thing if you're butting heads with government or nonprofits. I would say the second thing would be to be realistic about the political environment. Like, is this going to pass anyway or not? Right. And we kind of knew that this was going to pass. And so, I mean, was it up in the air or not really?
RRP, I don't know. Was there legislation on that one?
I don't think so. I think that was just an EPA rule.
That was an endeavor. Yeah, it was a rule. It was already a rule by the EPA, which meant it had teeth.
Right. It was just being enforced.
The objective then was to try to find out how we can get into homes without exposing the landlord, in this case, to unnecessary liabilities, whilst making sure that the children, especially the children in those homes, are also not exposed to unnecessary liabilities in the form of neurotoxins.
Right.
And so really it became kind of an alliance. That's where we met.
Absolutely. And that's the approach we took. Like, we actually had an environmental attorney from Massachusetts come to Omaha to teach landlords about this, looking at it from a liability standpoint, because we knew that across the country landlords were being sued, paying a lot of money, and we didn't want that to happen here in Omaha.
I got it. So you kind of came about it from an educational perspective. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, this passed. I'm sorry it's not your favorite thing in the world, but how about we all educate you and make sure that you don't get sued and you learn the right ways to do things, and all of our needs can be met.
And in so doing, protect yourself from the enormous potential cost of poisoning some kid.
So we're here with Kara Eastman, congressional candidate in District 2 in Nebraska, and we're talking to her not about her political campaign, but about how to get along with disparate groups of people when it's heated and people see things from different perspectives.
Where I think this matters is in business, generally speaking, but we can speak from the perspective of property managers. We run into landlords are oftentimes kind of the bad guy.
Yeah,
I mean, it's an easy target, especially for politicians, to try to affect change and go after landlords. Like, even right now, during coronavirus, landlords are a little bit under pressure just because there's kind of an onslaught of municipal laws that are almost making it sound like the tenants don't have to pay rent.
Yeah,
and so
and that's why we have this show today, is because there are a lot of people. This is very relevant. There are a lot of people who are struggling working with their local and state governments, and we want to give people some tools and tips on how do you do so effectively.
Well, and I think it's safe to say that in most instances, and Kara, you'd know better, people from the business community, generally speaking, especially small businesses, they go about it wrong.
So,
and they kind of start off in a defensive posture and feel it almost takes on this tone, a feel of, I can't give an inch lest I lose the war.
Yes. So I want to go straight to an issue just to exemplify what you're talking about, Jeremy. And that was with one of our mayors. They wanted us to put our leases in 7 different languages because we had a huge refugee population coming into Omaha. And obviously, if you go to court for an eviction, they're going to say, well, we only look at English.
Well, which is the governing document?
Yeah, which is the governing document.
And
it's going to be the English one.
Any other language, okay, then you have to kind of translate it, and then
is there an error in the translation?
Is the error, yeah, right, or is the nuance such that you can't really translate it, which is also a characteristic of language? It
was just not going to work. Yet it had passed, and it was law, and we were trying. It had passed. Remember, we had to unpass it and come up with a new solution. So the landlord community was all upset about this. And what we thought,
and rightfully so.
And what we thought was a good compromise was your goal, your end goal, is to make sure that refugees are educated in how to rent a property. That's your end goal, right? And they said yes. And so we said, well, let's create videos that show them what their rights, responsibilities are. And Kara helped with this. We made sure that lead safety was in the video as well. And let's do that in 7 languages. So I think one of the things that we've learned working together is sometimes you can, if you really home in on what the core goal is, you can find something that everybody is fine with.
Well, and I don't know, you know.
So Cara, I mean, you said that people were watching that video.
Yeah.
The refugees.
Yeah, there was a point where every refugee who came into Omaha saw that video.
So
yeah, and so what? I mean, everybody wins. Everybody wins. They know things about lead poisoning, so at least they're made aware. And effectively, the property owner can also demonstrate. They can say they saw this video. So we did kind of do our part in helping.
Due diligence.
In helping them understand the dangers that are out there. And so win-win.
So, Cara, what are some other win-wins that you've had in your career working at the Omaha Healthy Kids Alliance and working with small business?
Oh my gosh, we had a ton. I mean, that was our goal was always just to keep children protected. And we found that most small businesses in Omaha felt aligned with our cause, especially when we weren't going in there saying like, this is going to cost you so much more money, right? And that's the thing with small business is like, I think that both people on the political side and the nonprofit world have to understand like the margins are often so small for a small business. And so like we want to be careful that we're not impacting somebody's bottom line, but at the same time, keeping kids safe.
So that I would say was probably a big difference, something that you brought to those discussions because, well, yeah, I mean, you'd come out the gate and say, okay, look, I know it costs money. Like I get that, but that's the hurdle that we need to get past. It's going to cost money. Are there ways to mitigate the cost? Are there ways to avoid the cost? What we can't do is not protect the children. We don't have any choice there.
Well, and we would often go, or I guess I would at the time I was running the place, but go out to small businesses and say like, look, we can actually apply for a grant to help you do that because there are government grants out there or private grants. And so to me, that was always the best way to go approach somebody is say like, look, we want you to implement this process, this procedure to protect kids and we can pay for it. Well, that's a win-win.
Well, there were some people in the community, I'm sure on your side, that were a little bit more fiery. So did you ever have to manage other people and educate them on the best approach to getting along with people or seeing it from the business point of view?
Sure. I mean, and we even had staff at the time who, had a staff member who had worked for the health department and was just kind of tired of feeling like she was never being heard and that people just weren't listening to what she was doing. And so she was like, let's go after the landlords. Let's get them.
Oh my God, that woman. I remember her. I don't know, there must have been 40 people in that room. And that was the carbon monoxide law, I think is what you guys had worked on. The first draft of it seemed onerous, like that it was going to be a real problem for property owners to really even protect themselves, and certainly more difficult for it to actually become something that could help protect children or families. That woman, I don't remember her name, and I wouldn't say it if I did, but we were in the room, 40 of us, and we kind of went through this first draft of the legislation that had been proposed, and I think I was the only Republican in the room. And so I had some ideas, and I think a disproportionate amount of the conversation poured out from my mouth. But it was ideas about, okay, I have a problem with this area, I have a problem with this area. While you listened, and I think most people did, and we got somewhere. It was kind of fun. I read the law now, and I can see my exact words in it. Side note,
because they're misspelled.
The bad grammar, the grammatical errors.
The grammatical errors, the ain'ts, all that stuff, the y'alls. But that woman, she came up to me afterwards and said, you had said first that, look, this isn't supposed to be punitive against landlords. Okay. Mm-hmm. She came to me later and said, actually, I believe that any law that we do on this should be punitive against landlords just because they're landlords. And I was like, well, count me out. Like, and I'll use my political sway to kill this bill if you don't work with
But
me.
that's so those people can ruin any initiative that you have.
Do.
And so that's another important point for our listeners if they're trying to change a law or if they're trying to make a law more palatable that already exists. If you have people on your side who are willing to say that the other side is evil, that the other side who wants punitive penalties or whatever approach, you need to tell them thanks, but no thanks. You can't be here, and really use your leadership skills to get them out of the room because they can ruin everything. And so did you ever see common sense legislation derailed because people couldn't keep their side in check?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
do you have any examples of that?
Well, so one of the things that we were pushing for a long time was a lead safe housing ordinance that basically if you were going to move a child into a property that you had to have at least have a lead test to let people know what's there. And that was something that we worked on for years, trying to get the Omaha City Council involved in, and the way other cities had done it was with a rental property registration. And I completely understand like why landlords don't necessarily like that, but that ultimately did pass just without the lead stuff in it. So hopefully down the line that will get in there. But so I don't know if it was necessarily derailed, but I also am not at the organization anymore. So so maybe that was part of the reason why we didn't get that part in there. But the reality was, we're trying to get something passed to protect children. And yet the enforcement of that is always a challenge, right?
The enforcement. And that's where I think the common sense approach comes in, because sometimes if it's written by people not in the industry, the enforcement piece is totally outsized for what's possible. The expense is out of control. There are a lot of things. And so the devil is always in the details. So if people come in once something's been passed or in the process of passing it, and then just roll back maybe some of the harsher elements that make no sense, then that can make the law better. So I would use your carbon monoxide bill. Why don't you tell that story, Jeremy, how the carbon monoxide bill was not going to work and you were able to make it common sense and then actually benefit people more.
And you can always correct me on my history of this, but I think the original legislation for the carbon monoxide bill in Nebraska, first of all, we're here with Cara Eastman.
Yes.
She is we're speaking to her as the ex-president of Omaha Healthy Kids Alliance, a not-for-profit. And she had run-ins with me and other organizations in the city, and she successfully navigated them through it. And that's what we're talking about today.
So back to the carbon monoxide bill. So my recollection is that it first said that the landlord was liable even if the tenant had destroyed the carbon monoxide detector, that the liability was on the landlord no matter what happened.
Right. So the law didn't specifically say that the tenant could ruin it and still. But that is effectively what it said. It said the landlord will be responsible for having a working smoke detector or carbon monoxide detector in the home. Okay, and that's okay, except that it's operationally impossible, right? You can give somebody a home, and then the law makes it so that you can't just go in there randomly and do things. And respectfully, I mean that's the right way to have it. We can't just have landlords ruling the roost, going in whenever they want, so they have their privacy. And that privacy, though, gets in the way of us being able to go in and make sure that the carbon monoxide detectors are always working. So all we did was we altered the law to make it so that it was the landlord's responsibility to turn a property to a tenant with a working smoke detector.
And if carbon monoxide
detector. And if they called to say that it was broken, that it would be fixed in some certain amount of time, I think. And so now that works. And that makes a big difference on whether or not the landlord and community can get behind it. Because then they did. We got behind it and we're like, yeah, we'll pass it.
Well, there were people who weren't behind it and they were fighting it tooth and nail. Yeah. And we had to look at, there were so many states that already had it. It was going to pass.
We were 49. There were 49 other states that had that law.
And we had more carbon monoxide deaths than any other state or something like
exactly.
that.
Exactly. And if you think about it, with the funny thing about this and the funny thing about people fighting it is when you think about liability. A smoke detector is required, right? We were already doing that. But smoke is smellable. What's the word for that?
Smellable.
Smellable, I think is right. Yeah.
That's a perfect word
Odiferous.
for that.
Right. You can see it. You can hear it many times. Carbon monoxide is the opposite. And so when you think about like smoke detectors are there in case you're asleep and something goes right. They make noise. But carbon monoxide is different. Odorless, tasteless, colorless, like all these things where you can't detect it. And so the only way you know it's there is with a detector, or you die.
Yes.
And so in terms of liability, it actually makes more sense for people to have carbon monoxide detectors than smoke detectors. And so it was like an easy sell.
Absolutely.
It seemed like, at least.
And it wasn't, though. I mean, you ran into problems.
Oh, yeah.
And I know some of the groups that you ran into problems with. And
and I have to give credit to Senator Sarah Howard, because she was the one that was actually putting the bill forward.
Yeah, that's right.
We have Kara Eastman here, who is running for congressional seat here in Nebraska in District 2. But we are not talking about the campaign. We're actually talking about how we can get along with people, how government, nonprofits, and small business can make effective change without hating each other. And one of the important things that were brought up earlier in the show was that sometimes it's almost harder to get along with people on your own side than it is with people that technically you have some, adversarial views with. And I think that's true with us. I mean, we've always been maybe not on the same page politically, but we've always had an approach of getting along and focusing on a common goal and working from that common goal outward and trying to figure out what we can do that's palatable to all sides. But of course, there's an activist community both on the Republican and the Democrat side that make it more difficult to get those things passed. So, Kara, how have you been able to kind of get maybe some of the people that are more on the fringe to coalesce and work towards a common goal with you?
Well, it's funny as you're talking about this. I was thinking about the time, like when I started Omaha Healthy Kids, we were actually in some ways fighting government agencies like EPA and HUD.
You did, city,
and the city and the state to move in a different direction from the way that they were handling the Superfund site in Omaha. We're the largest residential Superfund site in the nation because of lead contamination. And so we didn't like what the EPA was doing. And then there was like an activist community that was just yelling and screaming, and we didn't like that either. And then you've got like the business community that's being impacted by this in a number of ways. And so we're trying to bring everybody together. And that was actually the reason that the organization Omaha Healthy Kids Alliance was started, was to bring all these groups together.
So what was your view? How is your view different from the EPA's or the activist community?
Well, so from the EPA side and HUD side, it was all like, we can't do that because of regulation, right? So it's like all this bureaucratic stuff. And so we were combing through legislation, rules, regulations, finding like loophole, like, nope, you can't actually do this. You just have to do it this way. And then on the activist side, we were saying like, look, here's where we align. Here's where we have common goals. Here's some educational and outreach efforts we can be doing so that we're empowering the community as well. So you think about the fact that lead poisoning tends to occur a lot more often in homes of African-American kids or Latino kids in our community. Well, there are activists on that side saying like, look, this is environmental racism. This is a racial justice issue. And they're absolutely right. And so, but there's ways to say, okay, where do we find common ground? What is our common goal? And basically as a nonprofit, I was saying, how much money do you want me to raise to fix this problem? Because that's the reality, is that we needed resources, and there hadn't been those resources prior to that.
So when you're working with these people, what were some of the personal skills? Because I think people struggle with, okay, that sounds great conceptually, but what does that really look like when I'm at a community meeting? What do I have to be aware of if I've never been involved in politics in my life, and how do I kind of move everything in a direction that is manageable?
Well, so I'm a social worker by trade, and we're actually taught to look at things from all sides. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's an important skill to have when you're leading these kinds of efforts or working with people from different sides of the aisle, is like being able to see things from their perspective, but then also articulating your own perspective at the same time without offending somebody. And so I think I think it's a lot of compromise without necessarily compromising your vision or your values, but being able to say, okay, here's where we have common ground. Here's what makes sense for both of us. And frankly, I do think that we need people who are just willing to step up and say, I will do the hard work to raise the funds for that, or I will do the hard work to get the votes for that. How do you feel about that? And sometimes just having somebody stand up and say, I'm willing to do all the grunt work. How about we move forward from there?
I appreciate that. So let's go back to hearing someone else's side, because, oh my gosh, we don't do that at all right now in this country. So are you talking about active listening, like repeating back, even if it's not your viewpoint, what you are hearing them say? Is that what you mean by seeing it from their point of view?
Yeah, I think that's one of the tools that we absolutely should be using more of. I mean, just even listening would be nice sometimes. I think and especially from a politician standpoint, like politicians love to hear themselves talk, but what we need are politicians to be listening, and it's hard. There's a lot of noise, especially on social media, but you have to be able to kind of comb through it and listen to what people are really talking about. And if it's a small business owner, they're talking about their bottom line. They're talking about their worrying about their business surviving. If it's a nonprofit, then they're talking about meeting their mission. And if it's a government agency, then, well, I don't always know what they're trying to do, but usually they're trying to effectuate change or make sure that a community is protected.
So we are here with Kara Eastman, congressional candidate in Nebraska in District 2, and we're talking about getting along with people, which is like almost a dirty word, I feel like, in politics now. But we're not really talking about politics. We're just talking about some of the past ways that we have worked together on common sense legislation for Nebraska in terms of housing. So one of the other things that I think would be helpful to people is if they are just getting involved in politics, and let's say they are a property manager and they're going into a room full of people from nonprofits in the city, when you walk into that room, it can be really intimidating. And maybe, Jeremy, you can talk about this. When you feel like you're the opposite side and you're a lone person, or you only have like two people with you, how do you prepare for maybe what could be an onslaught or a lot of conflict?
So the best way to do it is to look up Jonathan Haidt, Haidt. He wrote the philosophy, the theory. It's called Moral Foundations, and in it, so the moral foundations being care, harm, fairness, cheating, loyalty, betrayal, authority, subversion, sanctity, and degradation. And his theory basically says that's what morality is based on, those 5 things. And different political parties have different combinations of those 5 to different degrees and amounts.
So just to bring it down to like my level.
Right. Okay, so Johnny Haidt, my buddy.
So you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, that certain mindsets value certain things over others. So it's more of a prioritization of some aspects of morality over others, and that's where we conflict.
Well, and we being humans, we can go into a room and we can identify pretty quickly whether or not we are welcome ideologically. And then we are quick to put ourselves into a tribe. Like I am with, it's very binary. Like you are not me. We're not like each other. And so then at that moment, the parties start to drift away, and they start to not rely on each other's information. They start to distrust each other, and and especially when there starts to be conversation, people start to articulate the differences. Those differences, you're building a wall every time you do it. And so the trick, I think, is being able to go into a room and not bring up differences. And that's why I had
focus on the things that are the same.
That are the same, because it's a very slippery slope when there's a negative, when you start talking negatively, when you start talking about what we don't agree on, there are so many things we don't disagree on that the tribe is formed, tribes are formed, and to get back into the graces with the other is essentially impossible. At a certain point, it actually does become impossible. And politics today, this is a charged environment that we live in. People that we know hate Hillary Clinton. They've never met Hillary Clinton, and they hate her. They hate you. They hate Don Bacon just because they have an R or a D next to their name.
Yep.
And that's the political reality we're in right now. In order to succeed at helping our legislators, or our city councils, whatever, build better laws, you cannot highlight the differences between the people.
So, Kara, you go into rooms and there's a hostile element. How do you prepare for that?
Oh, wow.
She's got one of those Husker hands that's just a finger. And they're just like, I'm out of here, boys.
No, I'm really curious because a lot of people, if you're going to get involved in politics at any level, you're walking into, the lion's den. So how do you prepare for that?
Well, I think fundamentally you do have to have somewhat of a thick skin to go into politics, but I always assume that there's going to be somebody in the room that disagrees with me. Frankly, if there weren't, then that would be weird.
It's an echo chamber.
Right. Yeah. And I like it. I mean, because the reality is, if we're not able to actually have conversations, disagree about things, be able to civilly discuss them, we're not going to get anything accomplished.
So true.
And it's funny because when Jeremy and I first started working together, I don't think we ever identified our political affiliations. Why would we have at that time? I didn't even know that you were a Republican until you tried to recall our adorable mayor. But
just to clarify, we have never had an adorable mayor. We do not know who you're talking about.
But and we completely disagreed on that. I mean, I was making phone calls to help him not be recalled, and you were on the other side of that, and we remained friends through that. So, yeah. I mean, I think like it's a shame, and frankly, I think that it's a result of the parties themselves and the media that divide us, and really we do agree on more things than we disagree.
So I actually think that was a really good point about you guys worked on opposite campaigns. But you were always civil and kind to one another. So when that was over and there was another bill where you needed each other's help, you could rely on each other. And I think that's lost. Sometimes people go to the super mean, you're different than me at this moment, we can't talk, and I'm going to be a jerk to you, and I'm not going to say hi to you in a room. And they get so rude that when they need that person's help later, they burn that bridge. So I think that's something that's missing in politics a lot. It's just being cordial and friendly and kind even to your opponents.
Part of it's just because people believe that to compromise is to fail. Mm-hmm. And if that's what you think, first of all, you've never taken a civics course, but two, or a psychology course, because I'm sorry, the world doesn't revolve around you as an individual. Like there are flaws probably in your thinking because you're human. And the only way for you to get outside of your own skull is to address or to converse with people that have a different opinion. Best case scenario, you change their mind. Mm-hmm. Worst case scenario is you take a little bit away from the conversation and make your argument better. But at the end of the day, between the two of you, you've all gained a little bit and probably gotten a little bit closer to understanding, one, how the world actually works, and two, what you might be able to do to make it a little better.
Well, and I think actually this gets to the title of your show, right? Bootstrappers. Like, I think most of us agree that we should be able to get ahead in the United States of America, by far the largest economy in the world. One of the greatest countries in the world to live in, that we should all be able to get ahead by working hard. But there's a difference between that sentiment and rugged individualism. And I think the problem is when we teach our kids, like, the world revolves around you, or when we as individuals think the world revolves around us, that there's a problem there. And because we have to understand how we're all interconnected, and at the same time, we can't lose sight of the fact that each one of us needs to be working hard in order to get ahead in the United States, to raise a family, to make it a living. Like, we can't rely on the help of the government. We can't rely on the help of businesses. We have to actually become educated ourselves. We have to be able to live in a healthy environment. We have to be able to find good paying jobs. And to me, that's the difference, is like, we think that we're so ideologically different from Republicans to Democrats, but the reality is I think most of us agree on those things.
I think we do agree. I think what we don't agree on is the how we get there.
It's always process. Yep.
Yeah. It's process oriented, not outcome oriented, I think, in a lot of ways. So and that's really a good area to begin with. So we could begin any conversation with, hey, we have these common goals, just as you cited. Now, how do we get there? And what am I willing to give up? What is not so important to me in this bill or whatever we're working on? And what are my non-negotiables? And being civil to one another, then we can really go forward in a good way.
Well, and maybe be friends with someone that's a Democrat, because it is a lot harder if you're a Republican. It's a lot harder to be an a-hole to some, or even to call people names because they're Democrats. If you have friends that are Democrats, like we live in the Midtown area, which is mostly Democrat, and we're a minority in this area, but one thing that it's forced upon us is having to deal with people that are less intelligent than us,
oh
right?
Oh my God.
Yes, in Dundee, that's definitely your issue.
Dealing with people of a different mindset. And we have fun. We go out for drinks, or we go have...
And you should see people's faces when we do.
Yeah, especially if they know who we are. They're like, ooh.
How did that happen?
So,
and it is kind of weird, right?
It's funny.
And we're not talking about politics today, actually. We're talking about
to her as the former president of Omaha Healthy Kids Alliance.
Yeah, and we're just talking about conflict resolution. We all know there's just so much conflict in the world right now. And we need to hear more solutions. And in fact, it's actually one of the number one business conversations I have with any of my clients is on the subject of conflict resolution. How do you create harmony in a business environment? Maybe there are toxic individuals. You have to give feedback. It's so hard to manage people. And since Cara ran the Omaha Healthy Kids Alliance for 12 years, she has to run a campaign, which is a whole different beast. And she's a former social worker. You're the perfect person to have on this.
Are you
show,
ever actually a formal social worker?
No, once a social worker, you're a
like
social
a
worker for
Marine.
life. Yep.
There's no ex-Marines.
So when you meet people, or like let's say you're coaching a manager or something, what are some of the top tips that you give people on how to handle conflict in the workplace?
I have always been an advocate for airing grievances, which sounds funny. It sounds like Festivus, but but I think that what I saw, and I've run nonprofits for about 20 years, is that the number one issue is just miscommunication.
Yes.
Communication. And so, I do believe in open, transparent environments in the workplace. Sometimes that causes some problems, but I think in the end, actually people are happier that way. You kind of get things out as they come along and you don't just let things fester. So I always encourage people to, if they have an issue with somebody, bring it to them. If they need somebody in the room to do that, do it that way, document everything. But also just to be willing to hear other people's sides as well in order to come to some sort of common ground. And as we were talking about before, figure out what your common goals are first.
See, and I start the other way. I say, shut up. I just tell people to shut up, and then
how's
what
that
happens
work for
is...
you?
And that's why Gwen is the boss.
That's right.
No, but
It doesn't always work, I will say.
well, so I always think your point on miscommunication, I would say, 80% of conflict is miscommunication. I would say the next portion is one person prioritizing one thing over another. Mm-hmm. So like, let's say I prioritize speed over quality and you're prioritizing quality over speed, and we're misaligned there. And gosh, those two things, it's so easy to attribute malintent to somebody when it's honest. It's like an honest mistake, and it's one of those two things. I think that's the worst part, is that if you're on the receiving end of a miscommunication or a misalignment in priorities, you're like, that person's a jerk.
You have a good example with the dog.
The dog.
The canine?
Oh, I have a crazy example. So we have clients who work with people from Mexico. That's part of our business, is we find these people in Mexico, but ultimately they're trained by the person that they work for. So he trained her over text message, which I never recommend. It's not a very good idea to train someone that way.
A virtual
Turns out she's absolutely brilliant. And so she was able to figure it out, and she was in charge of doing applications. So processing applications and approving people for housing. Well, she did it great for 3 months. And then one day she got a police officer with a police dog. So she instant messages him, hey, do canines count as service animals? Legit question. And she thought canine, English being her second language, was a word just for police dogs. He misread it as
dog. Can
dogs be service animals? And he was like, why are you such an idiot? Like, how do you not know this after 3 months of doing this job? Well, then that got super negative. He attributed this it was really a mistranslation, to her being stupid, and their relationship deteriorated. They lost trust in each other. She walks out on him, and it blows out to be this huge thing. We do a root cause analysis and find out it's literally over a translation error. If one of them had picked up the phone at the end of that day and been like, you know what, I don't know what happened today, but sensed that you were upset with me. We need to walk this back. Like, let's walk through it. But you have to be bold. You have to be vulnerable. You have to be courageous to do that. But if you catch it right on the front end, then it prevents a lot of terrible things from happening. And I mean, this person
from spiraling.
Yeah, from spiraling out of control and going to a place that it does not have to go. So that's one of the things that I always tell people on the first day when I'm onboarding them, is I tell them that story, because it's so sad.
Yeah,
and it happens all the time.
Well, in our campaign, we actually months ago, before the coronavirus hit, we were doing weekly meetings on Fridays with the whole team, and it was a meeting just dedicated to problem solving. There was no other thing that we were bringing up.
So what kind of problems would you solve?
Either communication issues among the team, some kind of problem out in the community that needed to be solved, something that wasn't going right in the campaign that just we wanted to fix. So it was a time for people to bring grievances, concerns, something that was just bugging them. And what we found is when we kept people focused on that, it prevented stuff from going wrong later.
So how did you run that meeting? Did you go around the room and each person had their list and you walked through their list with them?
Yep.
So
and
it was an airing of grievances, literally.
It literally was. And
did you have a Festivus poll right in the middle of it?
And during the week when people would go to bring stuff up, we'd say, wait and save it for the Friday meeting. And what that did actually was give people time to think about it, process a little bit, because a lot of times it's knee-jerk reaction to something. Mm-hmm. Campaigns are stressful, so
no.
So
are you sure?
I don't know that much about them, but yeah. So it's just a good way to get people also to take a minute, step back, and say, okay, is this really something I need to bring to that meeting, or can I just address it now and get it over?
So I have a question about that. Did you guys call people out on bad behavior in front of everybody, and are you a fan of that or not?
So actually, I did not, because no candidate would do that. But the team members would call each other out, and because the meeting is structured in such a way where this is a meeting to problem solve, this is a problem meeting, people do it in incredibly respectful ways because they don't want to hurt people's feelings, and they actually temper themselves in a way that I think it develops leadership skills, because sometimes you do have to call people out. Sometimes it's okay to do that publicly. If it was something that really needed to be like a one-on-one thing, then the campaign manager would usually say, okay, this seems like something we're going to put a pin on and we'll talk later. But for the most part, it actually facilitated pretty healthy discussions. And yeah, sometimes people were a little, embarrassed or displeased. It's not always a fun meeting. But the reality is, in any organization, no matter what it is, there's always problems, and you need to solve them.
How long does this meeting last?
It's about 6 to 7 hour meeting. No, we kept it to an hour, and then it's Friday around happy hour, so
so it ended on a positive note.
Yes, exactly.
So for your management style, how would you characterize it?
I'm not a micromanager. I don't believe in micromanaging, and I'm not good at it. And so I really like to, I like developing leaders. And it's funny, we're sitting here in front of a newspaper, and my field director is on the cover of the World Herald today.
Oh, that's cool.
And I'm really proud of her for that. But I think that I like to see identify talent in everybody, make sure that I'm fostering that talent in whatever way I can. I believe in servant leadership. I believe in elevating people. My goal is that anybody that's working with me, if it's a campaign, that someday they'll be running for something if that's what they want, or if it's an organization, that someday they'll be leading it.
Very cool. So feedback, do you do a lot of one-on-ones? Is that how you manage people? Are you organized with your meeting approach with people and meet with them on a regular basis, or is it just ad hoc when you need it?
Yeah, I mean, at Omaha Healthy Kids, I did weekly meetings with all of the staff members, the senior staff members. Once we got bigger, and then the managers were meeting with their team members on a weekly basis. I think that that's really important to be able to at least have that half an hour time where it's just you and your supervisor to be able to just make sure you're moving things forward.
So, did you coach your managers on a specific way to manage the people below them? Or were you good at managing that middle management level?
Yeah, I mean, not just through my talking to them or at them, but usually through trainings.
What were some of the things that you saw they did wrong, the most common mistakes of a new manager?
Not addressing things as they come up.
That was a quick answer.
Letting things fester too long, and also just not being incredibly clear in your directives. Like if you set clear expectations for somebody and what they're doing. Make sure you're praising them along the way. Make sure you're addressing things as they come up. I think you can actually
And that's a tough one. Like I kind of fail on that front. I don't give enough credit or praise nearly often enough. I got to remember that.
It is a problem because if you run a business, if you started a business, you're just a driver. And if you are not motivated by words yourself, it's hard to realize that other people are motivated by words of affirmation. So it can be difficult when you're one personality type and you're managing people of another. But
and there are studies on this that show that actually for most people in a work environment, they're more motivated by praise from their supervisor than by financial incentives.
Then there are multiple currencies, and I say that often. It's obviously currency is currency, but you can also days off. A 4-day work week, or just kind of
a free lunch.
Free lunch.
Sometimes people are motivated by that. The camaraderie.
You Republicans always want to give people a free lunch.
That's our problem.
Just for the record, so everyone knows, I am now an independent. So I was a Republican activist for many years, but I'm now an independent.
I am still a Republican, and these days I kind of get grossed out saying it just because I don't like the way things are. But
we're gonna leave it at that.
Yeah.
So I think we learned a lot here today. We talked about getting along with disparate groups, finding common initiatives that we could all get behind, not being a jerk, corralling in people on our team who might be a little outspoken or not as good at indicating what they want as some other people. What other things can people take away from working with government officials?
If I'm giving advice, I'm just saying reach out and actually work with them, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on. Just get involved in it, have a conversation, and work on that specific issue towards an end. And what's your favorite thing about me?
I don't
gotta know.
I don't know where to begin, to be honest.
Well, Cara,
I thought you were going to say my wife.
So, Cara, thank you so much for coming to Bootstrappers today. We really appreciated your time, especially since you're running a busy campaign.
Yeah, thanks a bunch.
And we wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you. I appreciate
very much.
That. You too.
This has been Bootstrappers, a unique presentation designed to help you better understand what makes the world turn. Contact GWENN or Jeremy ASPEN at hosts@bootstrapper.club. Join us next time on News Talk 1290 KOIL, at our website, or download the podcast.